The coughing started again at 2:47 in the morning, a wet, ragged sound that tore through the baby monitor, like something breaking. Ethan Holloway was already moving before he was fully awake, bare feet hitting the cold hardwood, heart slamming against his ribs. In the nursery, his 3-year-old daughter Lily was curled into a small, trembling ball, her lips faintly tinged with a color no parent ever wants to see on their child. She reached for him with one small, shaking hand and whispered the only word that mattered. Patty. That single word would change everything that followed. Welcome back to the family revenge tales. The emergency room in Murfreesboro was cold and fluorescent lit, filled with the quiet beeping of machines and the low murmur of nurses moving between curtains. Claire sat with Lily wrapped in a hospital blanket, rocking her gently while a pediatrician reviewed the chest x-ray glowing on the screen. Pneumonia. The doctor's voice was calm but firm as she explained that the next 48 hours were critical, that if Lily's breathing worsened, they would need to admit her immediately. She showed them how to count Lily's breaths per minute, what color changes to watch for around her lips and fingertips, and sent them home with a nebulizer and a folder of instructions that felt impossibly thin for something so frightening. Ethan nodded along, taking in every word, but all he could really hear was his daughter's labored breathing beside him, the small hitch in her chest every time she tried to fill her lungs. He gripped Claire's hand as they walked out into the parking lot near midnight, exhaustion pressing down on both of them like a physical weight. Neither said much on the drive home to Franklin. There wasn't much to say. Their whole world had narrowed down to one small child's lungs, to the rise and fall of her chest, to counting seconds between breaths. Back at the house, Ethan carried Lily inside and laid her gently in her crib, adjusting the humidifier, checking her temperature every 20 minutes like a soldier standing watch. Claire made a bed for herself on the nursery floor, refusing to leave her daughter's side. Ethan understood. He felt the same pull. For the first time in years, nothing else in the world existed except keeping this one small person safe. Which is exactly when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. Almost. But something made him glance at the screen, and what he saw made his stomach drop in an entirely different way than before. The Holloway family group chat, usually quiet for weeks at a time, had exploded with messages. His mother, Judith, had posted an announcement, not a question, not a request, but an announcement that 14 relatives would be arriving Friday afternoon at Claire's lake cabin on Center Hill Lake for a 2-week family vacation. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. Claire's cabin. The one her grandparents had left her. The one that held her happiest childhood memories. Quiet mornings, drinking coffee on the dock with her grandmother, learning to fish with her grandfather's old rod. The smell of cedar and lake water that still made her smile every single summer. It wasn't just real estate to Claire. It was the last piece of her family she had left, the only place where she could still hear her grandfather's laugh if she closed her eyes and let the water do the talking. And Judith had just claimed it for 14 people without asking a single question? Claire typed back immediately, her fingers moving fast, but her tone remaining polite, the way it always did, even when her patience was wearing thin. She explained that Lily was sick. Pneumonia, hospital visit, doctor's orders for rest and quiet. She asked, gently but clearly, if everyone could postpone the trip by just 1 week. The response came fast. Not from Judith, from Ethan's father, Harold. Everyone's already requested off work. Flights and gas money aren't refundable. Family traditions don't stop because one kid has a cold. Ethan read the message 3 times, waiting for it to somehow read differently. It didn't. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, phone glowing in his hand, and felt something inside him shift. Not anger exactly, not yet. Something quieter and heavier. A slow, sinking recognition of a pattern he'd spent 20 years pretending not to see. Every summer had gone the same way. His parents invited extra cousins, aunts, family friends, people Claire had never even met without asking permission. His older brother Brandon always claimed the master bedroom the moment he arrived, regardless of who'd booked it first. Claire spent entire vacations cooking, cleaning, and hosting instead of resting. And Ethan? Steady, dependable Ethan, the one everyone called when something needed fixing, spent his time crawling under docks, patching roofs, and repairing whatever had broken since the last visit. No one ever offered to pay for groceries. No one ever asked what Claire wanted for her own cabin. It had always simply been assumed that whatever the Holloways needed, the Holloways would take. He thought about the years of quiet sacrifices that had built up around him like sediment at the bottom of a river, invisible until you tried to dig through it. Loans he'd given his parents that were never repaid, the mortgage payment he'd covered for them during a rough year, medical bills for an aunt he'd barely knew, vacation costs, cabin repairs, always paid, always given, always without asking anything in return. Because that's what family does, or so he'd been raised to believe. He hadn't noticed until this exact moment how much of that generosity had quietly become entitlement. Around 3 a.m., Lily woke again, crying softly, her small hands clutching at Ethan's shirt the moment he leaned over her crib. She wouldn't let go. Claire knelt beside him, exhaustion etched into her face, watching their daughter cling to their father as though he were the only steady thing left in her small, frightened world. She doesn't need a vacation house prepared for 14 people, Claire said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She needs her dad here, right now. That's it. Ethan looked down at his daughter's small fingers wrapped around his own, and something in his chest finally settled into place. For years, he had been protecting everyone, his parents, his brother, the extended family who called only when they needed something, while the two people who needed him most had quietly, patiently waited their turn. Not anymore. The next morning, while Claire stayed home with Lily, Ethan drove out to the lake alone. The cabin sat exactly as it always had, weathered wood and a wraparound porch overlooking still silver water. But today, instead of stocking the fridge or airing out bedrooms for guests, Ethan called a local technician named Cole Bennett. By early afternoon, every keypad code had been changed. Every spare key location had been emptied. Every old guest access method, the hidden key under the flower pot, the code Brandon had memorized years ago, was gone. Before leaving, Ethan walked to the edge of the porch and set up a small wooden sign he'd made that morning in his garage. Private property, closed due to a family medical emergency. He stood there a moment, looking at those words, feeling none of the satisfaction he might have expected. This wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about, for the first time in his adult life, protecting something that actually belonged to his own family, his wife, his daughter, instead of giving it away to people who had never once asked if it was theirs to take. His phone rang before he'd even made it back to his truck. Harold's name lit up the screen. "What is this?" his father asked, his voice sharp. "Judith just tried the code and it didn't work." "I changed it," Ethan said simply. "You what? We have 14 people driving up there tomorrow, Ethan." "Then they should probably turn around," Ethan replied, his voice calm in a way that surprised even himself. "It's Claire's little tantrum, isn't it, over a common cold?" "It's pneumonia, Dad, and it's not a tantrum. It's a decision. The cabin stays closed until Lily's better." Harold hung up without another word. Within the hour, Judith called, her tone shifting between hurt and disbelief, listing everything she had already planned. The groceries bought, the sleeping arrangements sorted, the boat rental confirmed. Brandon texted separately, clearly certain his younger brother was bluffing, telling him to stop being dramatic and just unlock the door before we get there. Ethan didn't argue with any of them. He simply repeated the same quiet truth each time. The cabin would remain closed until his daughter had recovered. For the first time he could remember, he didn't apologize for choosing her. Friday afternoon arrived, and with it 14 relatives in 3 overloaded vehicles, arriving at the lake cabin expecting the same carefree vacation they'd enjoyed every summer for the past 2 decades. Instead, they found locked doors, dead keypads, no spare keys hidden anywhere they remembered. Coolers sat abandoned in the gravel driveway. Children whined in the July heat. Confusion slowly curdled into frustration, and frustration curdled into anger. That's when Walter Green, the cabin's longtime neighbor, wandered over from his own porch, drawn by the commotion. Brandon approached him first, asking, almost demanding, if he had a spare key. Walter shook his head slowly. "Claire asked me to keep an eye on the place while your little niece recovers from pneumonia. Nobody's supposed to be inside right now." He paused, glancing around at the group gathered on the porch steps. "Might want to remember, too, this cabin's hers. Always has been. Her grandparents left it to her, not to the family reunion." A heavy, uncomfortable silence spread across the driveway. Nobody had an answer for that because nobody could argue with the truth. Embarrassed and furious, Brandon didn't handle the humiliation well. That evening, he posted photos of the locked cabin on social media, framing the story exactly how he needed it to sound. Ethan abandoning elderly parents, stranding innocent children, ruining a family tradition out of spite. The post spread quickly through group chats and comment sections, gathering outrage from relatives who only knew Brandon's version. Cousins Ethan hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about his parenting. Aunts he barely remembered called Claire cold in comments meant to be seen by everyone but her. No one mentioned Lily's pneumonia. No one mentioned Claire's polite request to simply postpone by 1 week. No one mentioned that Ethan had even offered to help cover hotel costs nearby. The truth, once again, had been quietly buried beneath a more convenient family narrative. Ethan saw the post the next morning and felt something harden inside him. Not rage, but resolve. For years, silence had been mistaken for peace. He decided it was time the family finally saw the whole picture, not just the parts that were convenient for them. While Lily recovered over the following 2 weeks, color slowly returning to her cheeks, her breathing evening out, her laughter returning in small, precious bursts, Claire sat down one evening with her laptop and years of carefully organized financial records. She and Ethan went through them together, line by line, remembering as they went. Emergency loans that were never repaid, mortgage payments covered during Harold's unemployment, medical bills for an aunt Ethan barely knew, vacation groceries, cabin repairs, dock replacements, roof patches, small sacrifices that, added together across 20 years, totaled more than $225,000. Claire looked at the final number on the screen for a long moment. 20 years, she said quietly, and almost none of it ever came back to us. To her. She glanced toward the nursery, where Lily was finally sleeping soundly. Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, the weight of the number settling over him like something he'd carried for years without ever measuring its true size. Several weeks later, once Lily had fully recovered, Ethan invited the family to his workshop in Franklin for what he called a simple conversation. Most arrived expecting an apology, an admission that he'd overreacted perhaps, or at the very least, a peace offering. Instead, they found neatly organized folders waiting on the workbench, each one containing printed financial summaries and a timeline spanning 2 decades of unpaid loans, uncredited repairs, and ignored boundaries. The room grew quiet as people began flipping through the pages. Numbers don't argue. They simply state themselves plainly, and this time, no one in the room could look away from what they said. Claire spoke first, her voice steady. "This cabin has always been mine," she said. "Not the family's. Mine. And not once in all these years did anyone ask before inviting guests. Not once did anyone offer to help maintain it. I don't think anyone considered how it felt, watching strangers take over the one place my grandparents left me." Harold shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't think it was that big a deal." "That's exactly the problem," Ethan said, his voice calm but unwavering. "You never thought it was a big deal because it never cost you anything. It cost us." He looked around the room, meeting each relative's eyes in turn. "From now on, no one visits the cabin without an invitation from both me and Claire. No more unlimited financial bailouts, no more guilt trips when we say no." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "For years, I confused being needed with being loved. They're not the same thing, not even close." No one in the room had an answer for that, either. In the weeks that followed, Brandon quietly deleted his misleading post after Ethan calmly shared screenshots of the original messages, showing exactly what had been said and what hadn't. Harold insisted, more than once, that Ethan had torn the family apart. Ethan simply replied that pretending everything had been healthy all along had never actually made it healthy. Some relationships cooled after that. Others, slowly, carefully, began to change. Then, one Sunday afternoon, nearly 3 months later, Ethan's phone rang. It was his mother. "Would it be all right," Judith asked, her voice smaller and more uncertain than he'd heard in years, "if your father and I visited on Sunday? Just the two of us. We'd like to see Lily, and we'd like to actually ask this time." It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't tearful or dramatic, but it was, Ethan realized, the first genuine question his mother had asked him in longer than he could remember. The following spring, Ethan, Claire, and Lily drove back out to the lake cabin together, just the 3 of them, windows down, the smell of pine and warm asphalt drifting through the truck. When they turned onto the gravel road and the cabin came into view, Claire let out a small breath she seemed to have been holding for months. No unexpected guests waited in the driveway. No demands lit up their phones. No quiet resentment simmered beneath the surface of every conversation. They spent the weekend exactly the way Claire had always dreamed of spending it. Mornings on the dock with coffee going cold in their hands, Lily chasing dragonflies along the shoreline in bare feet, Ethan finally fishing instead of fixing something for once. On the last evening, as the sun dropped low and orange over the water, Claire leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder and said it felt, for the first time in years, like her grandparents' cabin again. Not a resort, not a battleground, just home. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt like the peacekeeper in your own family, the one who gives and gives while everyone else simply takes, then you already understand exactly what Ethan and Claire went through. Subscribe to the Family Revenge Tales because every week we tell stories about ordinary people who finally find the courage to protect what matters most, even when it means disappointing the people who once expected it all. Sometimes protecting your family doesn't require shouting or revenge or grand dramatic gestures. Sometimes it simply means locking a door, refusing to surrender your peace, and teaching the people you love that respect should never be optional. This story carries real weight beyond its entertainment value. It illustrates how healthy boundaries, even late in life, can transform relationships built on years of silent imbalance. It shows that generosity without reciprocity often breeds quiet resentment, and that protecting one's immediate family sometimes requires disappointing extended family, however uncomfortable that may feel. It also reminds viewers that true love is shown through respect and consideration, not through constant sacrifice or blind obligation.